great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born.
A woman, a child, and a dragon. At first glance, this might sound like the ingredients for a frightening fairy tale. In fact, the troubling scenes that you just witnessed are part of a true and powerful prophecy given to the Apostle John nearly 2,000 years ago. What does this prophecy found in Revelation 12 tell us? Does it point to some event that happened thousands of years ago? Or does it describe things that are going to take place in the near future? And who do the woman, the dragon, and the child represent? Join us now as we journey deep into a world that few have ever seen, but all are a part of. Revelation, the bride, the beast, and Babylon. In the last book of the Bible, Revelation, the Apostle John was shown a vision of a great struggle between good and evil, a prophecy of a battle that has been raging behind the scenes since the dawn of time. The secrets behind this prophecy have been shrouded in mystery for centuries, until now. From the kingdoms and the rulers that have fallen around the world, to the men and women that stood up to fight for what they believed in, this is the story of Christianity, the search for truth and the foundation for the faith of billions.
Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born.
Many Bible scholars and historians have studied this prophecy over the years and agree that the prophecy of Revelation 12 points to an event known as the Massacre of the Innocents, which occurred in first century Judea.
In the decades leading up to the birth of Christ, the Roman Empire had conquered the whole Mediterranean world, including Judea. 20 years before Jesus was born, you have King Herod, a client king for Rome. We have documents about him outside the Bible that tell us that he was very cruel, he was ruthless, and you wouldn't want to get on his bad side.
Herod was very anxious when a small delegation of wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, announcing their search for the newborn King of the Jews.
Why would Herod be upset about that? Because that was Herod's title, as bestowed upon him by the Roman Empire, King of the Jews.
He finds out from the Pharisees and the Sadducees exactly where this child is to be born, and he finds out it's Bethlehem. And so he has such anger against this child, he sends in the soldiers to try and kill Jesus.
The Bible tells us this barbaric act was inspired by more than just the tyrannical jealousy of an old king. Many Bible scholars believe that it's part of a much bigger struggle that has spanned the ages and is still happening today. To uncover the secrets of this prophecy, we're going to first need to identify the main characters: the woman, the child, and the dragon. Let's take a closer look at the woman. We know that she's a symbol of someone or something. Does the Bible tell us what this woman represents?
Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her.
Very clearly, a woman in Scripture represents the church. You have a woman as representative of God's people. We see this in the Old Testament, we see it in the New Testament. Jesus comes from the people of Israel, and then the church grows up as something that Jesus develops.
Most importantly, this woman is about to give birth to a special male child. Who is the child?
We have a couple of indications. One, he rules with a rod of iron over the nations. That's a reference to the Old Testament, where clearly God is the one ruling over the nations with a rod of iron. And then he says he's caught up into heaven. So these two indications pretty definitively tell us that this is Jesus.
Now let's consider the arch-villain in this important prophecy, the dragon.
And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon.
You know, I wish I could just give you a fanciful theory here, but the Bible tells us who the dragon is. The dragon is the devil.
So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
What we see here in the first part of Revelation 12 is a symbolic portrayal of the age-old conflict between Christ and Satan. All through the life and ministry of Christ, Satan tried to disrupt Jesus' plans to provide salvation for humanity.
But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed.
They tried to silence him. They tortured him to death publicly.
But Satan's scheme to derail the plan of salvation was utterly shattered when Jesus rose from the dead.
And her child was caught up to God and his throne.
With the Son of God now physically beyond his reach, the devil directed all of his fury at the followers of Jesus, the new Christians. He did much of this through the cruel power of imperial Rome.
Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child.
Christianity was a struggling, small, persecuted minority that didn't have official status in the Roman Empire, and there were a series of persecutions, some of which were quite severe.
One of the roles of religion in the Roman Empire was to ensure the well-being of the state. The idea was if the gods were worshipped properly, then they would favor the empire, and if they were worshipped improperly, then they would, bad things would happen to the empire as a result of divine wrath.
They do not want to sacrifice to the gods, and the gods at that point include the emperor.
So it's easy to consider these people religious scapegoats. Basically, if something's going wrong, probably it's because there are Christians around who are refusing to give the gods their proper due. Christians are progressively stripped of their civil offices, their military offices, their books are confiscated, their churches are destroyed, they're forbidden to meet, and so on, all because there's an anxiety that this is really undermining the welfare of the empire.
As the early church suffered under this withering persecution of Rome, their lives became a powerful testimony for truth. While the pagans lived in constant superstitious fear, these Christians faced torture and death with a supernatural peace.
Basically what Nero did was he fed them to the lions. He had them tied to pillars. He put pitch on them, and then he set them on fire as human torches so they could have the festivities continue on into the night.
Being stretched, pulled into two, being killed by gladiators.
Just about every creative way that you can dispose of Christians.
When facing the painful end of their lives, they often sang and rejoiced. As thousands of Christians paid the ultimate price for their faith, their dying prayers and blood essentially became seed for the new church.
People are so enthralled by how these Christians are dying that immediately, the reaction is, sign me up.
And so the Christians spread like wildfire. The more you killed them, the more they stood for their faith.
Now, it is true, and I think it has to be emphasized, that the early church spreads despite the very concerted attempts at repression of extremely autocratic and powerful emperors who set themselves very firmly against the Christians, and yet the early church survives.
Tertullian argues whenever something goes wrong, whenever there's a famine or whenever there's an illness, a pestilence that sweeps through, everybody says, "The Christians to the lion!" And then he says snidely, as if so many could be fed to so few. And his point is that you can't destroy us all.
During this time of exponential growth, Christians all across the Roman Empire quite literally went underground. This labyrinth of tunnels and chambers beneath the Roman cities became known as the catacombs.
Now, the catacombs are important to understand. First, many people imagine that there are caves naturally under Rome, and the Christians simply went into them. The catacombs, almost without exception, are not natural caves. They were excavated by the Christians.
Sometimes services would be held there, in the very tombs of the martyrs.
The second point is, the very act of burying your dead is hugely significant. Christians believe in a resurrection of the body. Now, of course, that belief has shifted and changed over the centuries, but from all we understand, early Christians believed that they would be resurrected in that actual bodily form, and therefore they chose to bury their dead, not to cremate them. Therefore, if you are seen to be burying your dead, especially at times when there are intense waves of persecution, you're more or less saying to the police, "Come and investigate me, I may well be a Christian."
In AD 306, a new Roman emperor came into power, and things began to rapidly change.